The words cut through the humid Miami air like a knife sharp enough to silence the bustling gate area around them. Rebecca Martinez stood with her hands on her hips, her pristine Skylink Airlines uniform pressed to perfection, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her blue eyes burned with the kind of authority she'd spent 8 years cultivating, the kind that said she owned this space, and everyone in it better recognize that fact. The man standing in front of her didn't flinch. Marcus Thompson, 42 years old, looked down at her with dark brown eyes that had seen this exact scenario play out more times than he cared to count. His faded blue jeans had a small tear near the left knee. His gray hoodie, once black but now softened by countless washes, hung loosely over his broad shoulders. His sneakers, white leather worn to a comfortable cream, had walked through boardrooms worth billions and airport terminals alike. Marcus didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. That was exactly the point. Before we dive into this shocking story that's about to unfold, tell me something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. Because what you're about to see happen at Gate A7 in Miami International Airport is going to change how you think about power respect and what real justice looks like when it finally strikes back. Rebecca Martinez had no idea that the man she was trying to humiliate owned the very airline she worked for. She had no idea that her career was about to end in exactly 2 minutes, and she definitely had no idea that her next words would make her famous for all the wrong reasons. The gate area around them held its breath. David Rodriguez, a Hispanic businessman in a wrinkled suit, looked up from his laptop. Jennifer Walsh, a white socialite clutching a designer purse, raised her phone, slightly sensing drama. Michael Stevens, a tech executive, pretended not to notice, while Maria Gonzalez, a teacher heading home to visit family, watched with growing concern. Marcus reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his boarding pass. The paper was slightly crumpled, but the printing was clear. Seat 2, B First Class, Flight 847 to London. I have my boarding pass right here. Marcus said, his voice calm and measured. Not loud, not aggressive, just matter of fact. Seat 2, B. Rebecca snatched the boarding pass from his hand before he could react, her manicured nails scratching across the paper. She held it up to the fluorescent lights above, squinting at it like she was examining counterfeit money. This has to be fake, she announced loudly, making sure the passengers around them could hear. Someone like you could never afford Seat 2B. That's a $4,000 ticket. The gate area fell silent. Even the usual airport announcements seemed to pause, as if the building itself was holding its breath for what would come next. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he's about to teach someone a lesson they'll never forget. Marcus Thompson was the kind of rich that didn't need to prove itself. At 42, he'd built Thompson Global Logistics from a single delivery truck into a $12 billion empire that moved cargo across 6 continents. His company's planes carried everything from medical supplies to emergency relief, and his ships moved more container freight than most small countries imported in a year. But Marcus had learned something important growing up in Detroit's East Side. People showed you who they really were when they thought you couldn't fight back, when they thought you didn't matter, when they thought you were powerless. That's why Marcus had bought Skylink Airlines 6 months ago. Not because he needed another company in his portfolio, but because he'd received a flood of complaints about discrimination. Passengers of color being questioned about their tickets, being moved to worse seats, being treated like criminals for existing in spaces their money had bought them access to. The complaints painted a picture of an airline culture that had gone rotten from the inside. So Marcus had done what Marcus did best. He'd bought the problem so he could fix it. He'd purchased Skylink through a shell corporation so complex that even the airline's own board of directors didn't know their new owner's identity. He'd spent months flying their routes in expensive suits, being treated like royalty. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was dressed like himself. The version of himself that had grown up fixing cars with his father, the version that had loaded trucks at 3 a.m. to pay for business school, the version that still felt more comfortable in jeans than in $1,000 suits. Tonight, Marcus was conducting his final test. Rebecca Martinez had started as a flight attendant 8 years ago with dreams of seeing the world and meeting interesting people. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had curdled into something uglier. She'd developed a taste for the power that came with controlling who belonged in first class and who didn't. She'd learned to read passengers like books, deciding in seconds who deserved respect and who needed to be put in their place. At 28, Rebecca had worked her way up to senior flight attendant on Skylink's premium international routes. She prided herself on maintaining what she called cabin standards. She kept the wrong kind of people out of first class. She protected the experience for what she called real passengers. She'd turned discrimination into an art form, always careful to stay just on the legal side of plausible deniability. What Rebecca didn't know was that every complaint filed against her had crossed Marcus's desk. 15 formal complaints in 3 years, all dismissed by her supervisor, Carlos Rivera. Complaints about passengers being questioned about their tickets based on their appearance. Complaints about people being asked to prove they could afford their seats. Complaints about treatment that would have been unthinkable if the passengers had been white. Carlos Rivera, the Hispanic supervisor who enabled Rebecca's behavior, had his own reasons for looking the other way. He'd climbed the corporate ladder by never making waves, never questioning authority, never standing up for passengers who couldn't fight back. He'd learned that protecting flight attendants like Rebecca was easier than protecting the passengers she targeted. The passengers waiting at Gate A7 represented a cross-section of America. David Rodriguez had started his own consulting firm and was flying to London to close a deal that would make his family's future secure. Jennifer Walsh was heading to her 3rd wedding, this time to a British financier she'd met at a charity gala. Michael Stevens was a tech executive who'd built his fortune by staying quiet and avoiding conflict even when he saw injustice happening right in front of him. Maria Gonzalez taught 4th grade in Miami. She'd saved for 2 years to visit her sister in London, purchasing her economy ticket with 3 different credit cards. She'd watched plenty of injustice in her lifetime, but she'd also learned when to speak up and when to stay silent. None of them knew they were about to witness a moment that would change their lives. None of them knew that the man in the hoodie standing calmly at the gate counter was about to turn their understanding of power upside down. Marcus had chosen this flight specifically. Rebecca Martinez was working. Carlos Rivera was the gate supervisor. Flight 847 was Skylink's flagship route with their newest Boeing 777 and their most premium passengers. If Marcus was going to expose the culture of discrimination that had infected his airline, he was going to do it in front of the people who paid the most money to fly with him. The storm brewing outside Miami International wasn't the only storm about to break. Marcus Thompson had given his employees enough rope. Now he was about to watch them hang themselves with it, and he was going to enjoy every single second. Miami International Airport's Terminal D hummed with the controlled chaos of delayed flights and frustrated travelers. The storm rolling in from the Atlantic had turned the sky the color of old bruises, and lightning split the darkness every few seconds, followed by thunder that rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows. Gate A7 sat in the premium section of the terminal, separated from the main concourse by a glass partition and guarded by 2 security checkpoints. This was where Skylink Airlines boarded its first-class passengers, where wealthy travelers could avoid the crowds and noise of the general population. The gate area itself was a study in calculated luxury. Soft gray carpeting muffled footsteps. LED lighting painted everything in warm, expensive tones. The seating was leather and chrome, designed more for appearance than comfort. A small bar served overpriced cocktails to passengers willing to pay $30 for premium vodka. The walls displayed photographs of Skylink destinations: London's Big Ben, Paris's Eiffel Tower, Rome's Colosseum. This was Rebecca Martinez's kingdom. At the center of it all stood the boarding counter, a curved expanse of black marble and polished steel. Behind it, 2 computer monitors displayed passenger information in real time. A printer hummed quietly, spitting out boarding passes and baggage tags. The Skylink logo, a stylized wing in silver and blue, was embedded in the marble countertop, a reminder of corporate authority. Rebecca had positioned herself behind the counter like a general surveying a battlefield. Her uniform was regulation-perfect navy blazer with silver buttons, crisp white shirt navy skirt that fell exactly 2 inches below the knee. Her airline-issued scarf was tied in the approved knot. Her badge, polished to a mirror shine, read Rebecca Martinez, Senior Flight Attendant, 8 years of service. Her smile was professional, practiced, and completely hollow. The first-class lounge buzzed with the kind of conversations that happened when people had money and time to spend both. A businessman argued with his assistant about a presentation. A socialite complained to her friend about wedding planning stress. A tech executive typed furiously on his laptop trying to close a deal before his flight took off. The storm outside had delayed boarding by 30 minutes, which meant 30 minutes of tension, 30 minutes of impatient passengers, and 30 minutes for small frustrations to grow into larger problems. The air conditioning struggled against the humidity seeping in through the terminal's doors every time someone entered. The combination of delayed flights, expensive drinks, and forced proximity had created an atmosphere ripe for conflict. Marcus Thompson stood out in this environment like a shadow in a spotlight. His casual clothing marked him as different, wrong, out of place. The other passengers' eyes slid over him with the kind of practiced dismissal that came from years of determining who mattered and who didn't based on appearance alone. But Marcus was comfortable with being underestimated. He'd learned to use it as a weapon. The boarding gate's electronic display showed Flight 847 status delayed, weather. The delay had created a backup of frustrated passengers, all premium travelers who weren't used to waiting for anything. The gate agent's desk phone rang constantly with calls from other delayed flights, other angry passengers, other problems that needed solving. Rebecca loved the controlled chaos. It gave her more opportunities to exercise her authority, more chances to decide who belonged in her space and who needed to be reminded of their place. She'd perfected the art of customer service that looked helpful but felt humiliating. The jetway stretched out behind the gate counter leading to Skylink's newest Boeing 777. The plane sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, its silver fuselage gleaming under the terminal's floodlights. Inside that aircraft were 350 seats divided into classes that mapped exactly onto the social hierarchies Rebecca spent her life enforcing. First class, 14 seats for people who mattered. Business class, 40 seats for people who almost mattered. Economy, 296 seats for everyone else. Marcus owned every single one of those seats. Rebecca Martinez was about to learn that the hard way. The clock on the wall behind the boarding counter read 8:47 p.m. Lightning flashed again outside, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the entire terminal. The storm was getting closer. So was the reckoning. Rebecca held Marcus's boarding pass up to the light again, squinting at it like a detective examining evidence. The other passengers had started to notice the commotion. Conversations slowed. Phones came out not obviously, but ready to record if things got interesting. "This section is for real passengers," Rebecca announced, her voice carrying across the premium gate area. "Not whatever you are." David Rodriguez looked up from his laptop, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. He'd heard that tone before. He'd been on the receiving end of it more times than he cared to remember. His stomach twisted as he recognized the familiar combination of authority and disgust. Jennifer Walsh lowered her phone, her manicured fingers hovering over the record button. She'd filmed plenty of drama at charity events and society parties, but this felt different. This felt ugly. Michael Stevens shifted in his seat, pretending to read emails while listening to every word. He'd built his fortune by avoiding conflict, by staying neutral, by never taking sides. But something about the casual cruelty in Rebecca's voice made his chest tighten. Maria Gonzalez set down her book, a worn paperback novel she'd read 3 times already. She'd saved for 2 years to afford this trip to see her sister in London. She knew exactly how much every passenger in this gate area had paid for their seats because she'd priced them all when she bought her own economy ticket. The man in the hoodie had paid $4,000 for seat 2B. more money than she made in 2 months. Someone dressed like you could never afford first class. Rebecca continued, her voice getting louder, more confident. She was performing now, putting on a show for the other passengers. I know exactly what this is. You picked up someone's discarded boarding pass, or you printed a fake one, or maybe you just thought you could talk your way into a seat you didn't pay for. Marcus stood perfectly still. His hands relaxed at his sides. He'd learned a long time ago that staying calm in the face of aggression was the most powerful response you could give. It forced the other person to escalate, to reveal who they really were underneath the professional facade. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying despite its low volume. "I purchased that ticket 3 days ago. It's legitimate. You can verify it in your computer right there." Rebecca laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound that made David Rodriguez wince. "I don't need to verify anything. I can spot trouble when I see it, and you, sir, are trouble. Security needs to escort this man out immediately." She reached for the phone at her station, but Marcus raised his hand slightly. Not threatening, just getting her attention. "Before you make that call," Marcus said, still calm, still quiet, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're about to do. Are you denying me boarding because of my appearance, because of my race, because that's what this looks like to everyone watching?" The gate area had gone completely silent. Even the businessman on his phone had stopped talking. Even the socialite had stopped complaining about wedding plans. Every eye was focused on the drama playing out at the boarding counter. Rebecca's face flushed red. "How dare you play the race card? This has nothing to do with race. This has to do with fraudulent tickets and disruptive passengers. This has to do with maintaining standards." "Standards," Marcus repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "What standards exactly? The standard that says passengers need to dress a certain way to use the seats they paid for. The standard that says you get to decide who looks like they belong in first class." Jennifer Walsh's thumb hovered over her phone's record button. She'd seen enough drama at high society events to recognize when someone was about to do something they'd regret. This felt like one of those moments. "I have the authority to deny boarding to anyone who doesn't meet our conduct requirements," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "Anyone who I determine might be a security risk or a disruption to other passengers." "A security risk," Marcus said, "because I'm wearing a hoodie. Because you don't belong here." Rebecca snapped, the mask of professionalism finally slipping. "Because passengers like Mrs. Walsh and Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Stevens paid good money to fly in a comfortable, secure environment. They shouldn't have to worry about who might be sitting next to them." David Rodriguez stood up from his chair. He'd stayed silent through enough of these confrontations in his life. He'd watched enough people get humiliated while he did nothing. Not today. "Excuse me," David said, his voice shaking slightly, "but that man has a first-class boarding pass. I saw it. It looked legitimate to me." Rebecca turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but airline security is my responsibility. I've been doing this for 8 years and I know how to spot problems." "The only problem I see," Maria Gonzalez said quietly from her seat near the window, "is a flight attendant harassing a passenger who paid for his ticket." Rebecca's head snapped toward Maria. "Ma'am, please don't involve yourself in matters you don't understand. This is a security issue." "Security issue," Michael Stevens muttered just loud enough for people around him to hear. Right. Jennifer Walsh had heard enough. She pressed record on her phone and held it up, not hiding it anymore. "I'm filming this," she announced. "Everyone should see how Skylink Airlines treats its passengers." Rebecca's eyes went wide when she saw the phone. "Ma'am, you cannot record airline personnel without permission." "I can record anything I want in a public place," Jennifer shot back. "And this is definitely something people need to see." The phone call Rebecca had been about to make to security suddenly seemed like a very bad idea. But she'd gone too far to back down now. Her authority had been challenged in front of passengers who expected her to maintain control. She had to win this confrontation or she'd lose all credibility, Sir Rebecca said, turning back to Marcus with her fake professional smile back in place. "I'm going to need you to step aside and allow real passengers to board. If you have an issue with that, you can speak to my supervisor." Marcus checked his watch. A simple movement, but something about it made everyone in the gate area pay attention. Something about the deliberate way he looked at the time made Jennifer Walsh adjust her phone's angle to make sure she caught it. "Your supervisor," Marcus said. "Yes. I think that's exactly what we need right now." He pulled out his phone, a move that made Rebecca tense. But Marcus didn't call security. He didn't call a lawyer. He made a call that would change everything. Marcus's fingers moved across his phone screen with the casual ease of someone making a dinner reservation. The motion was so ordinary, so unremarkable, that it took a moment for Rebecca to register what was happening. He wasn't calling for help. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He was calling someone with authority she didn't recognize. "Patricia," Marcus said into the phone, his voice still calm but carrying a new undertone that made David Rodriguez sit up straighter. "It's Marcus. I need you to pull the passenger manifest for flight 847. Right now." Rebecca's confidence flickered for just a moment. She didn't recognize the name Patricia, but something about the way Marcus had said it, something about the assumption that whoever he was calling would drop everything to help him, sent a small spike of worry through her chest. "Who are you calling?" Rebecca demanded, trying to regain control of the situation. "Security doesn't operate through passenger phone calls. You need to follow proper procedures." Marcus held up one finger, not rudely, but with the kind of authority that made Rebecca take a step back before she realized what she was doing. He continued talking into the phone, his voice carrying just far enough for the gathered passengers to hear pieces of the conversation. "Yes, I'm at Gate A7 in Miami," Marcus said. "Flight 847 to London. I need you to verify Seat 2B passenger named Marcus Thompson." He paused, listening to something on the other end. "That's correct. Chairman's Circle status. Purchased 3 days ago." Chairman's Circle. Jennifer Walsh knew that term. She'd tried for years to reach Chairman's Circle status with Skylink Airlines. It was invitation only, reserved for passengers who spent more than $500,000 annually with the airline. It came with benefits money couldn't buy, guaranteed upgrades, dedicated phone lines, personal concierge service. Rebecca had heard of Chairman's Circle, but she'd never seen the status designation on a passenger manifest. In 8 years of working premium routes, she'd served plenty of wealthy passengers, but none wealthy enough to reach the highest tier of airline loyalty programs. "Patricia Williams," Marcus said to Rebecca, holding the phone slightly away from his ear so she could hear the voice on the other end. "CEO of Skylink Airlines. Would you like to speak with her?" The gate area went dead silent. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Rebecca's face had gone pale, but she was in too deep to back down now. She'd built her entire identity around being the authority in this space, around being the person who decided who belonged and who didn't. "I don't know who you're pretending to talk to," Rebecca said, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. "But CEO Patricia Williams doesn't take phone calls from random passengers. And she certainly doesn't take phone calls from passengers trying to board planes with fraudulent tickets." Marcus lowered the phone and looked at Rebecca with something that might have been pity. "Rebecca Martinez," he said slowly. 8 years with Skylink Airlines. Senior flight attendant on international routes. 15 passenger complaints filed against you in the past 3 years. All dismissed by your supervisor, Carlos Rivera." Rebecca's mouth fell open. There was no way a random passenger could know about internal complaint records. That information was confidential, restricted to management and human resources. The only way someone could access those files was if they had administrative privileges in the airline's computer system. "How do you know about—" Rebecca started to say, then stopped herself. Admitting that Marcus's information was accurate would be admitting that the complaints existed. And admitting the complaints existed would be admitting that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the perfect flight attendant she pretended to be. David Rodriguez had pulled out his own phone and was frantically typing. It took him 30 seconds to find what he was looking for. A Forbes article from 6 months ago with the headline, "Mystery Buyer Acquires Skylink Airlines in $8.20 billion Deal." The article mentioned that the new owner's identity was hidden behind a web of shell companies and legal entities, but it included a photo of the signing ceremony. David zoomed in on the photo. In the background, partially obscured by lawyers and executives, stood a tall black man in an expensive suit. The man looked familiar. Very familiar. "Oh my God," David whispered loud enough for Maria Gonzalez to hear. What Maria leaned over to look at David's phone screen. "I think," David started, then stopped. He looked at Marcus, then at the photo, then back at Marcus. "I think I know who he is." Meanwhile, Rebecca's supervisor, Carlos Rivera, had finally appeared at the gate. He'd been dealing with another delayed flight 2 gates over when he'd gotten a call about a disturbance at gate A7. Carlos was a thin man in his 40s who'd learned to navigate airline politics by avoiding confrontation and backing up his flight attendants no matter what. "What seems to be the problem here?" Carlos asked, approaching the boarding counter with the weary expression of someone who'd dealt with passenger complaints for 15 years. Carlos Rebecca said, relief obvious in her voice. "This man is trying to board with what appears to be a fraudulent first-class ticket. When I followed proper security protocols, he became aggressive and started making accusations." Carlos looked at Marcus, taking in the casual clothing, the calm demeanor, the expensive watch that didn't quite match the rest of the outfit. He'd seen this scenario play out before. Passengers sometimes got upgraded unexpectedly, or they splurged on expensive tickets while dressing like they were flying economy. It created confusion, but it wasn't grounds for denying boarding. Sir Carlos said to Marcus, "May I see your boarding pass and identification?" Marcus handed over both documents without comment. Carlos examined them carefully, then walked behind the counter to check the computer terminal. His fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up Marcus's reservation details. The screen displayed information that made Carlos blink twice. Not just first-class confirmation, not just Chairman's Circle status. Administrative flags that Carlos had never seen before. Priority codes that went beyond anything in his training manual. Rebecca Carlos said quietly, "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" But Rebecca was done with private conversations. She'd committed to her position in front of paying passengers, in front of recording phones, in front of witnesses who would remember how this confrontation ended. Backing down now would destroy her authority permanently. "Carlos, I don't need to speak privately," Rebecca said loudly. "I need you to support proper security protocols. This man does not belong in first class regardless of what some computer screen says." Marcus checked his watch again. The movement drew everyone's attention like a countdown timer in a thriller movie. 2 minutes, he said quietly. 2 minutes until what Rebecca demanded. Marcus smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind of smile that made Jennifer Walsh adjust her phone's grip and made Michael Stevens lean forward in his chair. It was the smile of someone who'd been patient for a very long time and was about to stop being patient. 2 minutes until your career ends, Marcus said. And then he made another phone call. The second phone call Marcus made was different from the first. This time he didn't announce who he was calling. He simply dialed a number from memory, waited for someone to answer, and spoke 2 words into the phone, Protocol 7. Then he hung up. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the airport's air conditioning. She didn't know what Protocol 7 meant, but something about the way Marcus had said it, something about the casual authority in those 2 words, made her realize that maybe this wasn't going according to plan. Carlos Rivera had finished checking Marcus's reservation details, and what he'd found had drained the color from his face. Chairman's Circle status was impressive enough, but the administrative codes attached to Marcus's profile were unlike anything Carlos had ever seen. Priority levels that went beyond first class, beyond VIP treatment, beyond anything in his 15 years of airline experience. Rebecca Carlos said urgently, "I need to speak with you right now." Privately. But Rebecca was committed now. She'd humiliated this man in front of paying passengers, in front of recording phones, in front of witnesses. If she backed down now, if she admitted she'd been wrong, her authority would never recover. She'd spend the rest of her career being second-guessed by passengers who remembered the flight attendant, who'd been wrong about the man in the hoodie. "I don't need to speak privately," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "I need to maintain security protocols. This man needs to be removed from the gate area immediately, and you need to support me in that decision." Marcus stepped closer to the boarding counter, not aggressively but with the kind of calm confidence that made everyone in the area pay attention. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and imposing when he wanted to be, but there was nothing threatening about his movement. It was the walk of someone who owned the space he was moving through. "Ma'am," Marcus said to Rebecca, his voice still quiet, but carrying a new edge, "I'm going to give you one last chance to check that computer terminal. Really check it. Look at my passenger profile. Look at the reservation codes. Look at the administrative flags." Rebecca glanced at the computer screen, but she didn't really look at it. She couldn't afford to look at it now. Looking at it would mean admitting that she might have been wrong, and flight attendants who admitted they were wrong in front of passengers lost all authority. "I don't care what that screen says," Rebecca announced. "Computer glitches happen. Fake reservations happen. People like you don't just magically appear in first class. I know exactly what you are." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. People like you. Everyone in the gate area had heard it. David Rodriguez had heard it. Maria Gonzalez had heard it. Jennifer Walsh had heard it, and her phone was still recording. Michael Stevens, who'd spent his entire career avoiding conflict, who'd built his fortune by staying neutral and never taking sides, finally couldn't stay silent anymore. People like what Michael asked, his voice cutting through the tension. "What exactly do you mean by people like him?" Rebecca turned to Michael, surprised that he'd spoken up. "I mean, people who don't belong in first class. People who try to game the system. People who think they can talk their way into seats they didn't pay for. He has a boarding pass," Maria Gonzalez said, from her seat by the window. "He showed you his boarding pass. It says first class. Boarding passes can be faked," Rebecca shot back. "I've seen it before. People print fake passes, or they pick up discarded ones, or they think they can intimidate their way into upgrades." David Rodriguez had been quiet during most of the confrontation, but he'd also been thinking. He'd been remembering the Forbes article he'd found on his phone, the mysterious buyer who'd purchased Skylink Airlines the photo of a tall black man in an expensive suit standing behind a table full of contracts. "Ma'am," David said carefully, "I think you should check that computer again. I think you should look very carefully at who this passenger is." Rebecca was beyond listening to suggestions from passengers. She'd been a flight attendant for 8 years. She'd dealt with difficult passengers, drunk passengers, passengers who thought they were more important than they really were. She knew how to read people, how to separate the legitimate travelers from the troublemakers. And Marcus Thompson, standing there in his faded jeans and worn hoodie, looked exactly like trouble. "Sir," Rebecca said to Marcus, her voice taking on the tone she used with unruly children, "I'm going to need you to step away from the boarding counter. You're disrupting the boarding process for legitimate passengers." Marcus didn't move. "I am a legitimate passenger. I paid $4,000 for seat 2B. I have Chairman Circle status with this airline. I have every right to be here. Chairman Circle." Rebecca laughed. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." That's when Marcus's phone rang. He answered it on the first ring. "Yes." The voice on the other end was loud enough for people nearby to hear. A woman's voice, tense and urgent. "Mr. Thompson, I just got word that there's an incident at Gate A7. Are you all right?" Marcus looked directly at Rebecca as he answered. "I'm fine, Patricia, but I think we have a significant problem with one of your flight attendants." Patricia, the same Patricia he'd spoken to in his first phone call. The Patricia he'd claimed was the CEO of Skylink Airlines. Rebecca's hands started to shake. "Ma'am," the voice on the phone continued, "I'm sending security to your location right now, and I'm personally coming down to the gate to handle this situation." Marcus lowered the phone. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "Patricia Williams, the CEO of Skylink Airlines, is on her way to this gate. She'll be here in about 90 seconds. When she arrives, she's going to ask you to explain why you've been harassing one of the airline's most important passengers." Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. CEO Patricia Williams, the Patricia Williams, the woman who turned Skylink Airlines from a regional carrier into a global powerhouse, the woman whose photo hung in every Skylink break room, the woman who Rebecca had never seen in person but who she'd heard about for 8 years. "You're lying," Rebecca whispered, but the confidence was gone from her voice. "You're just trying to scare me." Marcus checked his watch again. 80 seconds. Carlos Rivera had been listening to the entire exchange, and he'd finally put together the pieces that Rebecca was too proud to see. The chairman's circle status, the administrative codes in the computer, the casual way Marcus had called the CEO by her first name, the mysterious buyer who'd purchased Skylink Airlines 6 months ago and whose identity had never been revealed. Rebecca, Carlos said urgently, grabbing her arm, "We need to apologize. Right now. We need to apologize and hope it's not too late." Rebecca jerked her arm away. "I don't apologize to passengers who try to intimidate me. I don't apologize to people who think they can talk their way into seats they don't deserve." 60 seconds, Marcus said. The jetway door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, and Rebecca made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of waiting for Patricia Williams to arrive, instead of listening to Carlos Rivera's increasingly desperate suggestions that she apologize, instead of checking the computer terminal one more time, Rebecca decided to end this confrontation on her own terms. "That's it," Rebecca announced loudly enough for the entire gate area to hear. "I'm calling security right now, and this man is going to be removed from the airport. And then I'm going to personally escort every legitimate passenger onto the aircraft so we can finally take off." She strode toward the jetway entrance with the kind of righteous anger that comes from believing you're absolutely right. Marcus followed her, not hurrying, not pushing, just walking with the calm confidence of someone who'd already won a game that everyone else was still figuring out how to play. The other passengers followed behind them like spectators at a boxing match. Jennifer Walsh kept her phone camera rolling. David Rodriguez checked his boarding pass to make sure he had the right seat number. Maria Gonzalez gathered her carry-on bag, feeling like she was about to witness something important. Michael Stevens brought up the rear, typing furiously on his phone, sending messages to his assistant about potentially needing legal representation. The Boeing 777 was Skylink's newest aircraft, and the first-class cabin was a monument to luxury and excess. 14 private suites, each one larger than most people's bedrooms, arranged in a configuration that ensured maximum privacy and comfort. The seats converted to fully flat beds. Each suite had its own entertainment system, its own minibar, its own personal air circulation system. The cabin smelled like leather and money. Rebecca moved through the space like a queen, surveying her domain. She'd straightened seat cushions that were already perfectly aligned. She adjusted magazines that were already perfectly arranged. She checked amenity kits that were already perfectly positioned. This was her kingdom, and she protected it with the zealousness of a medieval guard. Marcus walked directly to seat 2B and sat down. The suite was positioned in the front row of the first-class cabin with extra legroom and a view out the aircraft's main windows. It was one of the most expensive seats on the plane, reserved for Skylink's most valued customers. Marcus settled into the leather seat like he belonged there, which of course he did. "Excuse me," Rebecca said, approaching his suite with her professional smile firmly in place. "Sir, this seat is reserved for a VIP passenger. You need to move to economy immediately." Marcus looked up at her with those calm dark eyes that had been driving her crazy for the past 20 minutes. "This seat is reserved for Marcus Thompson. That's me, and I'm not moving." Sarah Kim, a junior flight attendant who'd been working the first-class cabin, approached nervously. Sarah was 26, Korean-American, and relatively new to international routes. She'd heard the commotion at the gate through the aircraft's communication system, but she hadn't understood what was happening. Rebecca Sarah whispered, "The captain wants to speak with you. He says it's urgent." Rebecca waved her off. "Tell the captain I'm handling a security situation. I'll speak with him once this passenger has been removed." Captain Miguel Santos had been flying for Skylink Airlines for 12 years. He was a quiet man who prided himself on running safe, efficient flights with minimal drama. But in 12 years of flying, he'd never received a phone call from the CEO during passenger boarding. Patricia Williams had personally called the cockpit 5 minutes ago with instructions that had made Captain Santos's hands shake. Under no circumstances, Patricia Williams had said, is Marcus Thompson to be removed from this aircraft. He is to be treated with the highest level of courtesy and respect. Any crew member who fails to follow this instruction will be terminated immediately. Captain Santos didn't know who Marcus Thompson was, but he knew that when the CEO personally called to protect a passenger, that passenger was not someone you wanted to mess with. Sarah, Captain Santos called from the cockpit door. Tell Rebecca, I need to speak with her immediately. In private. But Rebecca was beyond listening to suggestions from junior flight attendants or worried captains. She'd committed to removing Marcus Thompson from the aircraft, and she was going to follow through on that commitment, even if it took all night. So Rebecca said to Marcus, her voice carrying throughout the first-class cabin, I'm going to ask you one more time to move to economy. If you refuse, I will have you removed by airport security. Marcus pulled out his phone and set it on the small table beside his seat. The screen showed the time 9:23 p.m. 30 seconds, he said quietly. The other passengers had boarded by now and were settling into their own seats. David Rodriguez was in seat 4A, close enough to hear everything that was happening. Jennifer Walsh had been assigned seat 1C directly across the aisle from Marcus, with a perfect view of the confrontation. Maria Gonzalez was back in economy, but the aircraft's intercom system was carrying every word of the argument into the main cabin. Michael Stevens was in seat 3B, and he'd finally figured out who Marcus Thompson was. The Forbes article had mentioned that the mysterious buyer of Skylink Airlines was worth over $12 billion. The article had described him as a logistics magnate who'd built his fortune moving cargo around the world. The article had mentioned that he was known for taking personal interest in customer service issues. Michael Stevens was watching a $12 billion man being harassed by a flight attendant who had no idea she was committing career suicide. 20 seconds, Marcus said. Rebecca's hands were shaking now, but she couldn't back down. She'd made her position clear in front of too many witnesses. If she admitted she was wrong now, if she apologized and allowed Marcus to stay in first class, every passenger on every future flight would remember the story of the flight attendant who'd been intimidated by a passenger in a hoodie. I don't care about your countdown, Rebecca said. I don't care about your threats. I don't care about your phone calls. You are not sitting in first class on my aircraft. 10 seconds, Marcus said. Sarah Kim had been watching the confrontation with growing alarm. She'd worked enough flights to recognize when a situation was spiraling out of control. She'd also received enough training to know that denying service to passengers based on their appearance was exactly the kind of behavior that got a flight attendants fired and airlines sued. Rebecca Sarah said urgently, maybe we should just let him stay. He has a boarding pass. He seems calm. He's not bothering anyone. Rebecca turned on Sarah with the fury of someone who'd been questioned one too many times. Sarah. I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I decide who belongs in first class. And I'm telling you that this man does not belong here. 5 seconds, Marcus said. The aircraft's main door opened. Patricia Williams, CEO of Skylink Airlines, stepped onto the aircraft, followed by 2 airport security officers, a man in an expensive suit who looked like a lawyer and a woman with a tablet who looked like someone's very serious assistant. The first-class cabin fell completely silent. Patricia Williams was a small woman in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that came from running a global corporation. She was dressed in a black business suit that probably cost more than Rebecca made in a month. Her eyes swept the first-class cabin, taking in the scene Rebecca standing over Marcus's seat with her hands on her hips. Sarah, hovering nearby with obvious distress passengers in surrounding seats filming with their phones. Mr. Thompson, Patricia Williams said, her voice carrying easily throughout the cabin. I am so sorry about this situation. Rebecca's face drained of all color. Marcus stood up from his seat, not hurrying, not making a dramatic production of it, just rising like a man who'd been expecting this moment for the past 20 minutes. Patricia Marcus said casually, "Good to see you. I hope you don't mind that I conducted this little test of your customer service standards." Patricia Williams smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a CEO who'd just discovered that one of her employees had assaulted the owner of her company. Mr. Thompson Patricia Williams said loudly enough for every passenger and crew member to hear, is the majority owner of Skylink Airlines. He purchased this company 6 months ago, and he has been conducting quality assessments of our customer service standards. The cabin erupted in gasps, whispers, and the clicking sounds of phone cameras. Jennifer Walsh's live stream, which had been watched by a few dozen of her social media followers, suddenly jumped to over 1,000 viewers as people started sharing the video in real time. Rebecca stood frozen, her mouth open, her hands still shaking. The man she'd been trying to humiliate for the past 30 minutes owned the airline she worked for. The man she'd accused of having a fake ticket had bought every seat on the aircraft. The man she'd called a security risk could fire her with a single word. Marcus looked at Rebecca with something that might have been pity. "Rebecca Martinez," he said quietly. 8 years of service, 15 discrimination complaints, all dismissed by your supervisor. He paused, letting that sink in. Your career with Skylink Airlines is over. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, analyzed by news commentators, and used as a case study in business schools for years to come. Rebecca Martinez, faced with the complete destruction of everything she'd built over 8 years, faced with the humiliation of being wrong in front of passengers who would never forget her name, faced with the reality that she'd been harassing the owner of the airline, did the one thing that guaranteed she'd never work in aviation again. She lost her mind completely. This is impossible. Rebecca shrieked, her professional composure shattering like glass. You can't own this airline. People like you don't own airlines. This is some kind of setup, some kind of scam, some kind of Rebecca. Patricia Williams said sharply, "Stop talking. Right now." But Rebecca was beyond listening to anyone, even the CEO. 8 years of unchallenged authority, 8 years of being the person who decided who belonged where, 8 years of getting away with treating passengers like subjects had built up a wall of arrogance that couldn't be torn down with mere facts. "I don't believe it." Rebecca continued advancing on Marcus like a predator cornering prey. "I don't believe any of it. You're just another passenger trying to intimidate your way into special treatment." Marcus remained perfectly still, watching Rebecca approach with the calm detachment of someone observing a science experiment. He'd dealt with enough unstable people in his business career to recognize when someone was about to do something they'd regret for the rest of their lives. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "I strongly suggest you step back and consider your next words very carefully." The first-class cabin held its breath. David Rodriguez gripped the armrests of his seat. Jennifer Walsh made sure her phone camera was capturing everything. Sarah Kim backed away from the confrontation, recognizing that she was about to witness something that would end careers and possibly result in criminal charges. "Don't you dare tell me what to do," Rebecca snarled, pointing her finger inches from Marcus's face. "Don't you dare stand there in your thrift store clothes and tell me how to do my job. I've been a flight attendant for 8 years. I know passengers, I know troublemakers. I know exactly what you are." Marcus looked at his watch one more time. "You have 60 seconds to collect yourself and apologize," he said calmly. "After that, you're going to face consequences that will follow you for the rest of your life." Rebecca's laugh was the sound of someone who'd lost all connection to reality. "Consequences. From you, you're going to be arrested for impersonating an airline executive. You're going to be banned from flying with Skylink Airlines. You're going to—" She never finished the sentence. Rebecca Martinez, senior flight attendant with 8 years of experience, raised her right hand and slapped Marcus Thompson across the face with enough force to make a sound like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stood perfectly still, his cheek reddening from the impact, his expression unchanged. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't raise his own hand. He simply reached up and touched his cheek where Rebecca had hit him, then looked at his watch again. "Your 60 seconds are up," Marcus said quietly. Patricia Williams was already on her phone, speaking in rapid, urgent tones to someone on the other end. The security officers who'd accompanied her onto the aircraft stepped forward, recognizing that they'd just witnessed an assault. Rebecca seemed to realize what she'd done. Her hand was still raised, still stinging from the impact. Her face had gone completely white. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, like someone having a panic attack. "I didn't," Rebecca started to say. "I was just..." He was being aggressive. "Ma'am," one of the security officers said, approaching Rebecca with his hands visible and his voice calm. "You need to step away from the passenger. You need to put your hands where I can see them." The reality of the situation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She'd just assaulted a passenger, on an aircraft, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of the CEO of the airline, in front of the owner of the airline. She'd just committed career suicide with a single slap. "This isn't fair," Rebecca said, her voice rising to a near scream. "This isn't fair." He was pretending to be someone he's not. He was trying to intimidate me. He was being aggressive and threatening. Jennifer Walsh's phone had captured every second of the confrontation. The video showed Marcus standing calmly, speaking quietly, making no threatening gestures. It showed Rebecca advancing on him, pointing at him, shouting at him. It showed the moment her hand made contact with his face. It was all there, recorded in high definition, uploaded to social media in real time. David Rodriguez had pulled out his own phone and was recording from a different angle. Maria Gonzalez, watching from economy through the aircraft's open cabin door, was also filming. Michael Stevens had his phone out, capturing everything. Rebecca Martinez's career hadn't just ended. It had ended in the most public, most humiliating, most thoroughly documented way possible. Marcus looked around the first-class cabin, making eye contact with each of the passengers who'd witnessed the confrontation. His voice when he spoke was calm and measured, but it carried an authority that made everyone listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, "what you just witnessed is exactly why I purchased this airline. This is why I've been conducting these tests. This is why change was necessary." He turned to Patricia Williams. "Patricia, I want every complaint filed against Rebecca Martinez reviewed by an independent board. I want every passenger who was mistreated by her contacted personally and offered appropriate compensation, and I want a complete investigation into how her supervisor was able to suppress 15 discrimination complaints without consequences." Patricia Williams nodded. "It will be done." Marcus looked at Rebecca, who was now crying, as the security officers placed her in handcuffs. "Rebecca," Marcus said quietly, "you had every opportunity to simply do your job professionally. You chose instead to judge me based on my appearance. You chose to humiliate me in front of other passengers. You chose to assault me when your authority was challenged." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Those were your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." Jennifer Walsh's live stream had exploded. What started as a casual recording of airport drama had become a viral phenomenon in real time. The viewer count had jumped from dozens to thousands to tens of thousands in the span of 30 minutes. Comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read them. "Oh my God, she hit him. This is insane. The flight attendant just assaulted a passenger. Wait, did he say he owns the airline? #Skylinks. Slap is trending. This is the best karma video I've ever seen." Jennifer was reading comments aloud as she filmed, her voice shaking with excitement and adrenaline. She'd stumbled onto the story of the year, and she knew it. "Guys, you're not going to believe this," Jennifer said into her phone camera. "The man that flight attendant just slapped, he owns the airline. He literally owns Skylink Airlines. I watched her harass him for 30 minutes because he was wearing casual clothes, and now she's being arrested for assault." The #Skylink slap had started trending on Twitter within minutes of the incident. Videos from multiple angles were being shared, liked, and commented on by thousands of people. The story was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. David Rodriguez had sent the video to his business partner with a message: "You'll never believe what I just witnessed on my flight to London." Within 10 minutes, his partner had shared it with their entire professional network. Within 20 minutes, it was being discussed in business group chats across the country. Maria Gonzalez had posted the video to her Facebook page with the caption, "This is what discrimination looks like in 2024. And this is what justice looks like when someone finally has the power to do something about it." Her teacher friends were sharing it with their own networks, adding their own stories of witnessing discrimination in airports, restaurants, and hotels. Michael Stevens, despite his usual preference for avoiding controversy, had shared the video on LinkedIn with a professional commentary, a masterclass in how not to treat customers, and a reminder that you never know who you're talking to. Customer service failures can have consequences beyond imagination. The video was being picked up by news aggregation sites. Blog posts were being written in real time. Social media influencers were creating response videos. The incident was becoming a cultural moment, a teaching example, a case study in corporate accountability. But the most powerful reaction was happening right there in the first-class cabin among the passengers who'd witnessed everything firsthand. David Rodriguez approached Marcus as the security officers led Rebecca away. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, "I want to apologize." Marcus looked at him with curiosity. "Apologize for what?" "For not speaking up sooner," David said. "I saw what was happening. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make waves. I let her treat you that way because it was easier than standing up to her." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's honest. I appreciate the honesty. I own a consulting firm," David continued. "I help companies improve their diversity and inclusion practices. But when it mattered, when I had a chance to actually practice what I preach, I stayed quiet. I'm ashamed of that." Maria Gonzalez had left her economy seat and walked up to the first-class cabin. She approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Marcus asked. "For having the power to do something about it," Maria said. "I've been on flights where I was treated like I didn't belong, where flight attendants questioned my ticket or assumed I was flying on someone else's dime, or acted like I was suspicious just for existing in a space they didn't think I should be in. But I never had the power to do anything about it. I could file complaints that got ignored. I could post on social media and hope someone cared. But I couldn't change anything." She gestured around the cabin. "You could, and you did." Sarah Kim, the junior flight attendant, approached with obvious nervousness. "Mr. Thompson," she said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I knew what Rebecca was doing was wrong, but she was my supervisor. I was afraid to contradict her." Marcus looked at Sarah with kindness. "How long have you been flying?" 2 years, Sarah said. "This is my first international route assignment. Were you afraid you'd lose your job if you spoke up?" Sarah nodded. "Rebecca has a lot of influence with management. She could make life very difficult for flight attendants who contradicted her." Marcus turned to Patricia Williams. "Patricia, I want Sarah Kim promoted immediately. Anyone who recognizes discrimination but feels powerless to stop it because of corporate hierarchy needs to be in a position where they can make a difference." Patricia nodded. "Done." The transformation happening in the cabin was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Witnesses who'd stayed silent were finding their voices. Bystanders who'd avoided involvement were taking responsibility. People who'd felt powerless were realizing they had more power than they'd thought. The video was still spreading across social media, but the real impact was happening person by person, conversation by conversation, as people who'd witnessed the incident processed what they'd seen and decided how they were going to act differently in the future. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his daughter, "Dad, you're trending on Twitter. Are you okay?" He smiled and typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just teaching some people a lesson about treating others with respect." The response came back immediately. "Proud of you, Dad, but next time maybe warn me before you become internet famous." As the security officers escorted Rebecca Martinez off the aircraft, Marcus remained standing in the first-class cabin surrounded by passengers and crew members who were still processing what they'd witnessed. This was the moment he'd been planning for months, the culmination of a strategy that had begun the day he'd decided to purchase Skylink Airlines. Marcus reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone, but was actually a mobile command center for his global business empire. With a few taps on the screen, he activated a conference call that connected him to his legal team, his public relations staff, and the executive leadership of Thomson Global Logistics. "Status report," Marcus said into the device, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "Sir," came a voice from the speaker, "we have legal counsel standing by in Miami, London, and New York. PR team is monitoring social media and news outlets in real time. Executive team is prepared to implement any policy changes you authorize." Patricia Williams watched this display of resources and coordination with growing understanding of exactly how powerful the man standing in her aircraft really was. She'd known Marcus Thompson was wealthy enough to purchase Skylink Airlines. She hadn't fully comprehended that he operated a business empire that could mobilize legal and public relations teams across 3 continents with a single phone call. Legal Marcus continued into the device, "I want a complete review of every discrimination complaint filed against Skylink Airlines in the past 5 years. Any complaint that was dismissed without proper investigation gets reopened. Any employee who suppressed legitimate complaints gets terminated. Any passenger who was mistreated gets contacted personally and offered appropriate compensation. Understood, sir. Timeline, 48 hours. The speed of Marcus's response was as impressive as its scope. He wasn't just reacting to what had happened on this aircraft. He was using this incident as a catalyst to address problems that had been building throughout the airline for years. PR Marcus said, "I want a statement released within the hour. Skylink Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination. Any employee who mistreats passengers based on appearance, race, or any other protected characteristic will be terminated immediately. We're implementing new training programs, new oversight procedures, and new accountability measures." "Sir," the voice responded, "we're already seeing significant social media response to the incident. #Skylink Slap is trending globally. The video has been shared over 50,000 times. Public reaction is overwhelmingly supportive of your response." Marcus looked around the cabin at the passengers who'd witnessed the confrontation. These people weren't just bystanders anymore. They'd become part of the story, part of the solution. "I want each of these passengers contacted personally," Marcus said into the device. "They witnessed discrimination, they documented it, and they spoke up about it. They deserve recognition for doing the right thing." Jennifer Walsh, who was still live streaming, looked up from her phone in surprise. "Mr. Thompson, you don't need to." Marcus held up a hand. "Miss Walsh, your video documentation of this incident will help ensure that discrimination like this doesn't happen to other passengers. That's a valuable public service." David Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, if you need any assistance with the consulting on diversity and inclusion practices, my firm would be honored to help pro bono." "I'll take you up on that," Marcus said. "Send your contact information to Patricia. We're going to rebuild this airline's culture from the ground up." Captain Miguel Santos emerged from the cockpit looking shaken by the evening's events. "Mr. Thompson," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I heard the commotion at the gate, but I didn't intervene. I should have come out and de-escalated the situation." Marcus studied the captain carefully. "How long have you been flying for Skylink? 12 years, sir. Have you seen discrimination incidents before?" Captain Santos hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Not often, but yes." "What did you do about them?" I filed reports, but I was told that customer service issues were handled by the ground staff and flight attendants, not pilots." Marcus turned to Patricia Williams. "Patricia, I want new protocols implemented immediately. Pilots have authority to intervene in discrimination incidents. Flight crews receive mandatory sensitivity training. And any employee who witnesses discrimination and fails to report it faces disciplinary action. It will be done," Patricia said. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and saw a number he recognized, a major television news network. "Mr. Thompson," the voice said when he answered, "this is CNN. We understand you were involved in an incident on a Skylink Airlines flight tonight. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" Marcus looked around the cabin one more time. At Jennifer Walsh, still live streaming to an audience that had grown to over 100,000 viewers. At David Rodriguez, who'd found the courage to speak up. At Maria Gonzalez, who'd flown up from economy to express her gratitude. At Sarah Kim, who'd been promoted on the spot for having the integrity to recognize wrong when she saw it. "I'll give you a statement," Marcus said into the phone. "But not just to CNN. I want a press conference arranged for tomorrow morning. Every major news outlet invited. I want to talk about what happened here tonight, but more importantly, I want to talk about what's going to happen next." The transformation of Skylink Airlines had begun with a single slap from an out-of-control flight attendant. But it was going to continue with new policies, new training, new oversight, and a new culture that put respect for passengers above everything else. Marcus ended the call and looked at Patricia Williams. "Patricia, I want you to personally oversee the implementation of these changes. This isn't just about punishing Rebecca Martinez. This is about making sure nothing like this ever happens again," understood, Patricia said. "What about the criminal charges against Rebecca?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "That's not up to me. She assaulted a passenger on an aircraft. The legal system will handle that. But from the airline's perspective, her termination is immediate and permanent." The aircraft's intercom crackled to life. Captain Santos was making an announcement to the entire plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the incident that occurred during boarding tonight, our departure has been delayed. We want to assure all passengers that the situation has been resolved, and we will be departing for London as soon as possible. On behalf of Skylink Airlines, I want to apologize for any inconvenience and thank you for your patience." Marcus sat back down in seat 2B, finally relaxing for the first time since he'd entered the gate area 2 hours ago. The test was complete, the results were clear, and the changes that needed to happen were already in motion. His phone buzzed with another text from his daughter. "Dad, the video is everywhere. You're famous." Marcus typed back, "Good. Maybe it will help other people who get treated like they don't belong." The response came immediately. "Love you, Dad. See you in London." Marcus smiled and closed his eyes. It had been a long night, but it had been worth it. Skylink Airlines would never be the same. The Boeing 777 had become the stage for one of the most dramatic reversals of power in corporate history. As Patricia Williams stood in the first-class cabin with her entourage of lawyers and executives, the full scope of what had just happened began to sink in for everyone present. Rebecca Martinez was gone, led away in handcuffs by airport security, her 8-year career destroyed in a single moment of violence. But her removal was just the beginning of Marcus Thompson's response to what he'd endured. The real reckoning was about to begin. Marcus stood up from seat 2B and addressed the entire first-class cabin, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made everyone stop what they were doing and listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, "I want to explain to you exactly what you just witnessed and why it was necessary." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the aircraft's engines seemed to quiet down, as if the plane itself was listening. 6 months ago, Marcus continued, I purchased Skylink Airlines for $8.2 billion. Not because I needed another company in my portfolio, but because I'd received dozens of complaints about discrimination from passengers who looked like me. Jennifer Walsh's live stream audience had grown to over 200,000 viewers. The comments were streaming by so fast they were impossible to read, but the engagement numbers kept climbing. I spent months flying Skylink routes in expensive suits, being treated like royalty by the same employees who harassed other passengers for the crime of dressing casually. Tonight, I dressed like myself. The real me. The version of me that built my first business loading trucks at 3 a.m. And I was treated exactly like those complaint letters said I would be. David Rodriguez was recording this speech on his phone, recognizing that he was witnessing a moment that would be studied in business schools for decades to come. Rebecca Martinez Marcus continued had 15 discrimination complaints filed against her in 3 years. 15 passengers took the time to document how they were treated to write formal letters to follow proper procedures to report discrimination. And every single one of those complaints was dismissed by her supervisor without investigation. Maria Gonzalez wiped tears from her eyes. She'd filed her own complaint against a different airline 3 years ago after being questioned about whether her first-class ticket was legitimate. The complaint had been dismissed with a form letter thanking her for her feedback. Carlos Rivera Rebecca's supervisor created a system where discrimination was not only tolerated but protected. He enabled Rebecca's behavior by ensuring that complaints against her never resulted in consequences. He prioritized the comfort of employees over the dignity of passengers. Patricia Williams was taking notes on her tablet, documenting every word for the comprehensive reform that would begin tomorrow morning. She'd run Skylink Airlines for 5 years, but she'd never had an owner who cared enough about customer experience to personally test the system. But this isn't just about Rebecca Martinez or Carlos Rivera, Marcus said. This is about a culture that allowed discrimination to flourish. A culture that assumed certain passengers deserved respect and certain passengers needed to prove they belonged. A culture that measured people by their appearance instead of their humanity. Sarah Kim, the junior flight attendant, stood at the back of the cabin, understanding that she was witnessing the kind of leadership she'd never seen before. Marcus Thompson wasn't just firing problem employees, he was rebuilding the foundation of how the airline operated. Tonight, that culture ends, Marcus announced. Tomorrow morning, Skylink Airlines begins implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. Every employee will receive mandatory sensitivity training. Every complaint will be investigated by an independent board. Every passenger will be treated with dignity and respect regardless of how they dress or what they look like. Michael Stevens stopped typing on his phone to applaud. The gesture was spontaneous, but it spread through the cabin like a wave. David Rodriguez applauded. Maria Gonzalez applauded. Jennifer Walsh applauded while keeping her phone camera focused on Marcus. Even some of the flight attendants applauded. Marcus held up his hand for quiet. But I want you to understand something important. What happened tonight wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating Rebecca Martinez or destroying her career. It was about consequences. He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with each person. Rebecca had every opportunity to simply do her job professionally. She could have checked my boarding pass, verified my reservation, and welcomed me aboard like any other passenger. Instead, she chose to judge me based on my appearance. She chose to humiliate me in front of other passengers. She chose to assault me when her authority was challenged. The weight of those words settled over the cabin like a blanket. Everyone present had watched Rebecca make those choices. Everyone had seen her escalate a situation that could have been resolved in 30 seconds. Those were her choices, Marcus repeated. The consequences are the natural result of those choices. Patricia Williams approached Marcus with obvious deference. Mr. Thompson, what are your instructions for implementing these changes? Marcus pulled out his mobile command device again. Legal team, he said into the speaker, I want a comprehensive audit of every Skylink employee who has been the subject of discrimination complaints. Any employee with a pattern of complaints gets terminated. Any supervisor who suppressed complaints gets terminated. Any manager who created policies that enabled discrimination gets terminated. Timeline, sir, 1 week. The scope of what Marcus was proposing began to sink in for everyone listening. He wasn't just fixing the problem. He was gutting the entire system that had allowed the problem to exist. PR team, Marcus continued, I want a documentary crew hired to follow the implementation of these changes. I want complete transparency. I want every passenger, every employee, every competitor to see exactly how we're rebuilding this airline's culture. Understood, sir. Marcus looked at the passengers who'd witnessed the incident. I want each of you to be part of this process. Your testimony, your videos, your willingness to speak up when you saw injustice, that's the foundation of the new Skylink Airlines. Jennifer Walsh lowered her phone for the first time in 2 hours. Mr. Thompson, what you're doing. It's incredible. But isn't this kind of reform expensive? Won't it hurt your profits? Marcus smiled. Miss Walsh, discrimination is expensive. Lawsuits are expensive. Bad publicity is expensive. Employee turnover is expensive. Lost customers are expensive. Treating people with dignity and respect, that's an investment that pays dividends forever. David Rodriguez stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, as a diversity consultant, I've seen a lot of companies try to change their culture. Most of them fail because they focus on policies instead of people. What you're doing, experiencing the problem yourself, documenting the reality, implementing comprehensive solutions, this is how real change happens. Marcus nodded. That's exactly right. You can't fix what you don't understand. You can't change what you don't measure. And you can't improve what you don't hold people accountable for. Captain Santos emerged from the cockpit again. Mr. Thompson, I've received clearance for takeoff whenever you're ready. But I want you to know that what I witnessed tonight has changed how I'm going to run my flights. Discrimination stops at the cockpit door. That's exactly what I want to hear, Marcus said. As passengers began settling back into their seats for the delayed departure, Marcus's phone rang again. This time it was a call from the White House. Mr. Thompson, the voice said, this is the President's Chief of Staff. The President saw the video of what happened on your aircraft tonight. He wanted me to call and commend you for your response to discrimination. Marcus looked around the cabin one more time at the faces of people who'd found their courage at the flight attendants who were already treating passengers differently at the transformation that was happening in real time. Thank you, Marcus said into the phone. But this isn't about commendation. This is about making sure every American can travel with dignity. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, carrying passengers who'd witnessed history and a man who'd used his power to make the world a little more just. Before the Boeing 777 had even reached cruising altitude, the consequences of Rebecca Martinez's assault on Marcus Thompson were rippling through Skylink Airlines like an earthquake. Patricia Williams had activated the airline's emergency response protocol, normally reserved for weather disasters or security threats, to address what she now recognized was an existential crisis for the company's reputation. In the Skylink Airlines headquarters in Atlanta, emergency meetings were being called at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night. Department heads who'd been at home with their families were racing back to the office. Legal teams were being assembled. Public relations specialists were monitoring social media trends and news coverage. Human resources executives were preparing termination paperwork and conducting emergency policy reviews. The hashtag #Skylink had become the #1 trending topic on Twitter globally. The video of Rebecca slapping Marcus had been shared over 1 million times across all social media platforms. News outlets were picking up the story. Late-night talk show hosts were writing jokes about airline discrimination. The incident was becoming a cultural phenomenon. But Marcus Thompson wasn't interested in becoming a social media celebrity. He was interested in using this moment of maximum attention to implement changes that would last long after the hashtag stopped trending. Patricia Marcus said as the aircraft leveled off at 35,000 feet, I want you to call an all-hands meeting for every Skylink employee worldwide. Video conference for international staff. Everyone from pilots to baggage handlers to customer service representatives. When Patricia asked, her fingers already moving across her tablet to coordinate the logistics. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. Patricia's eyes widened. Sir, that's less than 10 hours from now. We have employees in every time zone, and some of them will be attending at unusual hours. Marcus interrupted. This can't wait. Every hour we delay implementing these changes is another hour that passengers might be discriminated against by our employees. The scope of what Marcus was proposing was unprecedented in aviation history. Calling a global all-hands meeting with 10 hours' notice would be expensive, disruptive, and logistically complex. But it would also send an unmistakable message that discrimination was no longer acceptable at any level of the organization. Legal Team Marcus said into his command device, I want Rebecca Martinez's personnel file reviewed in real time. I want to know every complaint that was filed against her, every incident that was reported, every supervisor who signed off on keeping her employed. Sir, the voice responded, We're already finding irregularities. Rebecca had complaints filed against her that were never entered into the formal system. Supervisor Carlos Rivera appears to have been intercepting complaints and handling them informally. What does that mean exactly? It means passengers filed formal complaints that never reached human resources. Rivera was taking complaint letters and responding directly, telling passengers their concerns were being addressed while never actually documenting the incidents. Marcus felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. How many complaints are we talking about based on what we've found so far? At least 37 over the past 3 years. Possibly more. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 37 passengers had taken the time to document discrimination, to write formal complaints, to follow proper procedures to report mistreatment. And every single one of those complaints had been buried by Carlos Rivera to protect Rebecca Martinez's employment record. I want every one of those passengers contacted personally, Marcus said. I want them flown first class to any destination they choose on us. I want them given written apologies from the CEO, and I want them involved in developing our new anti-discrimination policies. Patricia Williams was taking notes as fast as she could type. Mr. Thompson, the cost of providing first-class travel to 37 passengers, plus their families, could be significant. Marcus looked at her with an expression that made her understand exactly how he'd built a $12 billion business empire. Patricia, the cost of settling 37 discrimination lawsuits would be much more significant. The cost of losing passenger trust would be catastrophic. The cost of allowing this culture to continue would be immeasurable. Understood, sir, HR team. Marcus continued into his device. I want a complete audit of every supervisor who reports directly to Carlos Rivera. I want their complaint handling records reviewed. I want their email communications searched for evidence of discriminatory policies or practices. Sir, came the response. We're finding evidence that the complaint suppression wasn't limited to Rivera. It appears to be a pattern among several supervisors across multiple airports. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The problem was bigger than he'd thought. The culture of discrimination wasn't isolated to Rebecca Martinez or even to Carlos Rivera. It was embedded in the management structure of the airline. How many supervisors are we talking about? At least 12, possibly more. Fire them all, Marcus said without hesitation. Tonight, effective immediately. Security escort them from their offices. Revoke their access to airline systems. I want them gone before the sun rises. The passengers in first class had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. Jennifer Walsh was still live streaming, and her audience had grown to over 500,000 viewers. People around the world were watching Marcus Thompson dismantle an entire system of discrimination in real time. David Rodriguez leaned across the aisle. Mr. Thompson, are you concerned about wrongful termination lawsuits from the employees you're firing? Marcus smiled grimly. David, employment law in this country gives employers broad authority to terminate employees who violate company policies. Discrimination violates company policy. Suppressing complaints violates company policy. Creating hostile environments for passengers violates company policy. Every person we're terminating tonight has violated multiple policies. What about the union contracts? David asked. Don't flight attendants and supervisors have union protection? Union contracts protect employees from arbitrary termination, Marcus replied. They don't protect employees from termination for cause. Discrimination is cause. Assault is cause. Suppressing complaints is cause. Sarah Kim, the junior flight attendant who'd been promoted earlier in the evening, approached Marcus's seat nervously. Mr. Thompson, I need to tell you something about the culture in our training program. Marcus gestured for her to continue. We're taught that passenger complaints are usually exaggerated or false, Sarah said quietly. We're taught that some passengers try to get special treatment by claiming discrimination. We're taught to be skeptical of complaints, especially from passengers who don't look like they can afford expensive tickets. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Sarah was describing a training program that actively encouraged discrimination, that taught employees to doubt the experiences of passengers who reported mistreatment. Who teaches these training sessions? Marcus asked. Corporate Training Department. The sessions are mandatory for all customer service employees. Marcus turned to Patricia Williams. I want the entire corporate training department terminated tonight. I want every training manual reviewed and rewritten. I want new trainers hired who understand that passenger complaints are to be taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and resolved promptly. Sir Patricia said carefully terminating the entire training department will be expensive and disruptive. We'll need to rebuild the entire program from scratch. Marcus looked at her with the expression of someone who'd made his fortune by making difficult decisions quickly and decisively. Patricia, Marcus said rebuilding is exactly what we're going to do. We're not fixing the system. We're replacing it. The Boeing 777 continued its flight toward London, carrying passengers who'd witnessed the beginning of one of the most comprehensive corporate transformations in modern business history. And Marcus Thompson, still wearing his faded hoodie and worn jeans, had proven that real power isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about what you do when you have the ability to make change happen. As the Skylink Airlines investigation expanded throughout the night, the discoveries became increasingly damning. What had started as a review of Rebecca Martinez's employment record had uncovered a network of discrimination that extended far beyond a single problematic flight attendant. Marcus's legal team was working around the clock, assisted by forensic accountants, IT specialists, and employment law experts. The scope of what they were finding required expertise in multiple areas of corporate law and federal employment regulations. Sir, came a voice through Marcus's command device at 2 a.m. London time. We've completed the initial review of suppressed complaints. The number is higher than we originally estimated. Marcus was still awake in his first-class seat working through documents on his tablet, while other passengers slept around him. How much higher 63 complaints over 3 years? Not just against Rebecca Martinez, but against 17 different flight attendants across 12 airports. All complaints suppressed by supervisors using the same methods Carlos Rivera used. The number was staggering. 63 passengers had experienced discrimination severe enough to file formal complaints, only to have their concerns buried by airline supervisors who prioritized employee protection over passenger dignity. What types of discrimination are we talking about? Marcus asked. The complaints fall into several categories, the voice continued. Passengers questioned about ticket legitimacy based on appearance. Passengers asked to prove they could afford their seats. Passengers moved to worse seats without explanation. Passengers subjected to additional security screening based on racial profiling. Passengers denied service at airport lounges and premium facilities. Marcus felt sick. Each complaint represented a person who'd been humiliated, degraded, and treated as less than human by employees of his airline. People who'd paid good money for service and instead received discrimination. I want every one of those passengers contacted personally, Marcus said. Not by customer service representatives, not by public relations staff, by senior executives, vice presidents and above. I want them apologized to personally and compensated appropriately. Sir, the cost of that level of personal attention could be substantial. The cost of not doing it would be catastrophic, Marcus replied. We're talking about people whose trust we betrayed. People who were victimized by our employees and then had their complaints buried by our supervisors. Money can't undo that damage, but it can demonstrate that we take their experiences seriously. Patricia Williams, who'd been working through the night alongside Marcus, looked up from her own tablet. Mr. Thompson, we've also discovered financial irregularities in addition to the discrimination complaints. What kind of irregularities Rebecca Martinez and several other flight attendants have been systematically stealing from passenger amenities? Premium alcohol, luxury food items, expensive amenity kits. The theft appears to have been coordinated with supervisors helping to cover up inventory discrepancies. Marcus rubbed his temples. The discrimination was bad enough. The theft added another layer of criminal behavior that would require involvement from federal law enforcement agencies. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate based on what we've discovered so far is approximately $200,000 in stolen merchandise over 3 years. The theft wasn't just about money. It was about a culture that viewed airline resources as personal property, that treated company assets as available for individual use, that operated without oversight or accountability. Any evidence that stolen items were being sold? Marcus asked. Yes, sir. We found eBay accounts linked to several employees where premium airline amenities were being sold online. Champagne, caviar, luxury blankets, electronics from first-class amenity kits. Marcus shook his head in disgust. So, passengers were paying premium prices for amenities that were being stolen by employees and sold for personal profit. That appears to be accurate, sir. The investigation was revealing a level of corruption that went far beyond individual bad actors. This was organized theft, coordinated discrimination, and systematic abuse of passengers who'd trusted Skylink Airlines with their money and their dignity. Legal team Marcus said, I want criminal referrals prepared for every employee involved in theft. I want federal authorities notified about the organized nature of this criminal activity. And I want civil lawsuits prepared against every supervisor who enabled this behavior. Understood, sir. We're also finding evidence that some of the discrimination complaints were suppressed because passengers threatened to expose the theft. Marcus felt his anger rising again. Explain that. Several passengers noticed that amenities were missing from their flights. When they complained, they were told the issues would be addressed if they didn't pursue formal complaints about other aspects of their service experience. The picture was becoming clear. Passengers who experienced discrimination were being silenced by supervisors who threatened to ignore their complaints about theft if they pursued discrimination claims. It was a system of mutual cover-up that protected criminal employees at the expense of paying customers. How many employees are we talking about total? Marcus asked. Conservative estimate 47 employees across multiple job categories and locations. Flight attendants, supervisors, ground crew, customer service representatives. Marcus looked around the first-class cabin at the sleeping passengers who'd witnessed Rebecca Martinez assault him 12 hours ago. They'd seen the tip of an iceberg that extended far deeper into his airline than he'd imagined. I want all 47 employees terminated immediately, Marcus said. I want their final paychecks held pending criminal investigation. I want their benefits terminated effective immediately, and I want their employment records flagged to prevent them from working for any other airline. Sir Patricia Williams said carefully, terminating 47 employees simultaneously will create significant operational challenges. We'll need to replace them quickly to maintain flight schedules. Marcus considered this. Then we hire replacements immediately. We partner with aviation schools to recruit new graduates. We offer signing bonuses for experienced crew members from other airlines. We do whatever it takes to rebuild our workforce with people who understand that discrimination and theft are unacceptable. The cost of that level of hiring will be substantial, Patricia noted. Patricia, Marcus said, I want you to understand something about how I run businesses. Short-term costs that solve long-term problems are good investments. Short-term savings that create long-term problems are expensive mistakes. Rebuilding our workforce will cost money. Allowing corruption to continue would cost everything. The investigation team continued working through the night, uncovering additional evidence of discriminatory practices, theft, and cover-ups. Each new discovery reinforced Marcus's decision to completely overhaul the airline's culture rather than trying to fix individual problems. By 4 a.m. London time, the scope of the necessary changes had become clear. Skylink Airlines wasn't just firing problem employees. It was rebuilding its entire approach to customer service, employee oversight, and corporate accountability. Sir, came a final voice through the command device. We've completed the preliminary investigation. Our recommendation is a complete organizational restructuring with new leadership at every level that was involved in covering up these issues. Marcus looked out the aircraft window at the sunrise beginning to appear over the Atlantic Ocean. In 6 hours, he'd be addressing every Skylink Airlines employee in the world. He'd be explaining not just what had gone wrong, but how they were going to make it right. Approved, Marcus said simply. Let's rebuild this airline the right way. While Marcus Thompson was 40,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, orchestrating the most comprehensive corporate reformation in aviation history, Rebecca Martinez was experiencing the complete destruction of everything she'd spent 8 years building. The Miami-Dade County Jail was not a place Rebecca had ever imagined she'd spend the night. The holding cell smelled of disinfectant and desperation, filled with women who'd made mistakes that had cost them their freedom. Rebecca sat on a metal bench, still wearing her Skylink Airlines uniform, still processing the fact that her career was over. The charges against her were serious assault on an aircraft, a federal crime that carried potential prison time. The assault had been captured on multiple phones from multiple angles, shared on social media millions of times, and witnessed by passengers whose testimony would make conviction nearly certain. But the criminal charges were just the beginning of Rebecca's problems. Her phone had been returned to her after processing, and the notifications were overwhelming. Hundreds of missed calls from news outlets wanting interviews. Thousands of social media mentions, most of them negative. Messages from former co-workers distancing themselves from her actions. Emails from lawyers offering to represent her, all demanding substantial retainer fees she couldn't afford. The video of her slapping Marcus Thompson had been viewed over 5 million times in the first 12 hours. News outlets were running the story as their lead item. Late-night talk show hosts were making jokes about her actions. Social media influencers were creating response videos analyzing her behavior. Rebecca Martinez had become infamous overnight. The bail hearing was scheduled for 8 a.m., but Rebecca's family couldn't afford the bail amount. Her parents, working-class people from Tampa, who'd been proud of their daughter's career with a prestigious airline, were devastated by the news coverage. Her younger brother, a college student, called to tell her that students on his campus were sharing the video and that professors were using it as an example in criminal justice classes. Rebecca's ex-husband had called to inform her that he was seeking full custody of their 10-year-old daughter, citing the assault charge and her termination from Skylink Airlines as evidence that she was unfit for shared custody. The daughter Rebecca had worked extra shifts to support would now be used against her in family court. But the personal devastation was nothing compared to the professional destruction that was unfolding. Skylink Airlines had issued a statement at 6 a.m. Eastern just as morning news shows were beginning their coverage of the incident. Skylink Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination or violence against passengers. Rebecca Martinez has been terminated immediately for gross misconduct. Her actions do not represent our values or our commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect. We are implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure incidents like this never happen again. The statement was accompanied by announcements of new policies, new training programs, and new oversight procedures. Skylink wasn't just distancing itself from Rebecca's actions. It was using her actions as justification for a complete overhaul of its corporate culture. Carlos Rivera, Rebecca's supervisor who'd spent 3 years protecting her from discrimination complaints, was also experiencing the complete destruction of his career. He'd been terminated at 3 a.m. by security officers who'd escorted him from Skylink headquarters with his belongings in a cardboard box. Carlos had spent 15 years building his career in airline management, working his way up from baggage handler to gate supervisor to his current position. In a single night, all of that progress had been erased. His employment with Skylink was terminated for cause, which meant no severance pay, no pension benefits, and no positive employment references. The investigation into Carlos's suppression of discrimination complaints had revealed the extent of his enabling behavior. 37 complaints buried. Dozens of passengers whose concerns were dismissed. Years of protecting employees who discriminated against customers based on race appearance and perceived economic status. Carlos was facing potential criminal charges for conspiracy to violate federal civil rights laws. His lawyer had informed him that the FBI was interested in interviewing him about organized discrimination practices at Skylink Airlines. The same federal authorities who investigated hate crimes were now investigating the airline's mistreatment of minority passengers. The other 12 supervisors who'd been terminated alongside Carlos were experiencing similar destruction. Careers ended, reputations ruined, financial security destroyed, families devastated by the sudden loss of income and benefits. But the investigation was revealing that the discrimination hadn't been limited to individual bad actors. It had been enabled by corporate policies that prioritized employee protection over passenger rights, that treated discrimination complaints as nuisances to be managed rather than problems to be solved. The 47 employees terminated for theft and discrimination were discovering that their actions had consequences beyond job loss. The stolen merchandise had been tracked through eBay sales and PayPal accounts, creating a paper trail that federal prosecutors could use to pursue criminal charges. Several employees were facing federal theft charges for stealing airline property and selling it online. Others were facing conspiracy charges for coordinating their criminal activities. All of them were facing civil lawsuits from Skylink Airlines for recovery of stolen merchandise and damages to the company's reputation. The news media was covering the story as more than just an isolated incident of workplace violence. Business journalists were analyzing the corporate culture that had enabled discrimination. Legal experts were discussing the federal crimes committed by airline employees. Social justice advocates were calling for industry-wide reforms to prevent similar incidents. Rebecca Martinez had become the face of airline discrimination, the symbol of what happens when employees abuse their authority to mistreat passengers. Her photograph was being used in news articles about racism in the travel industry. Her actions were being cited by politicians calling for stronger civil rights enforcement. But she wasn't the only one facing consequences. The passengers who'd witnessed the incident were being contacted by news outlets, talk show producers, and documentary filmmakers. Jennifer Walsh's live stream had been picked up by major news networks and was being used as evidence in the federal investigation. David Rodriguez was being interviewed by business magazines about corporate accountability and customer service. The incident was becoming a case study in how social media could amplify injustice and accelerate consequences. Rebecca's assault on Marcus Thompson had been documented in real time, shared globally within hours, and resulted in immediate corporate action. By the time Rebecca's bail hearing began at 8 a.m., the story had spread far beyond aviation industry news. It was being discussed on morning talk shows, analyzed by legal experts, and used as an example by politicians calling for stronger civil rights protections. The judge set bail at $50,000, an amount Rebecca's family couldn't afford. She would remain in jail pending trial wearing Orange County Jail uniforms, instead of the Skylink Airlines uniform she'd been so proud of. As she was led back to her cell, Rebecca could hear other inmates discussing her case. The video had been played on the jail's television, and everyone knew who she was and what she'd done. Rebecca Martinez had achieved the notoriety she'd never wanted for actions she couldn't take back, with consequences that would follow her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, 40,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Marcus Thompson was preparing to address every Skylink Airlines employee in the world about the comprehensive changes that would ensure Rebecca's actions could never happen again. The Skylink Airlines global headquarters in Atlanta buzzed with unprecedented activity at 7 a.m. on a Friday morning. Conference rooms that normally hosted routine budget meetings were now filled with legal teams, human resources executives, and corporate trainers working to implement the most comprehensive workplace transformation in aviation history. Patricia Williams stood in the main auditorium testing the video conference system that would connect her to over 75,000 Skylink employees across 6 continents. In 2 hours, every pilot, flight attendant, gate agent, baggage handler, and customer service representative would hear directly from Marcus Thompson about the future of their company. The employees gathering in break rooms, airport lounges, and conference centers around the world had no idea what to expect. They knew something significant had happened on Flight 847 the previous night. They'd seen the viral video of Rebecca Martinez slapping a passenger. They'd heard rumors about mass terminations and policy changes, but none of them understood the scope of what was about to be announced. Marcus Thompson was still aboard the Boeing 777 as it prepared to land at London Heathrow Airport. He'd spent the entire flight working with his legal and public relations teams to craft a message that would fundamentally change how Skylink Airlines operated. This wasn't going to be a typical corporate communication about improved customer service. This was going to be a declaration of war against discrimination in all its forms. At exactly 9 a.m. Eastern Time, every Skylink Airlines facility in the world received the same video feed. Marcus Thompson appeared on screens in break rooms from Miami to Mumbai, from Seattle to Singapore, from New York to New Delhi. He was still wearing the same faded gray hoodie he'd worn on Flight 847, still wearing the same worn jeans that had led Rebecca Martinez to assume he didn't belong in first class, still wearing the same comfortable sneakers that had carried him through the most transformative night in his company's history. The message was clear before he said a single word. Appearance doesn't determine worth. "Good morning." Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing global workforces. "My name is Marcus Thompson. 6 months ago, I purchased Skylink Airlines because I believe in the power of aviation to connect people, cultures, and opportunities across the world." Employees in break rooms leaned forward to listen. This was the mysterious owner whose identity had been hidden behind corporate shell companies and legal entities. This was the man who'd spent $8 billion to buy their company and then disappeared into the background, while Patricia Williams ran day-to-day operations. Last night, Marcus continued. I conducted a test of our customer service standards by flying as a regular passenger dressed in casual clothing. What I experienced was discrimination, harassment, and ultimately assault by employees who judged me based on my appearance rather than treating me with basic human dignity. The silence in Skylink facilities around the world was absolute. Employees who'd been joking and chatting moments before were now staring at screens with growing understanding of exactly what had happened on Flight 847. Rebecca Martinez, the flight attendant who assaulted me, had 15 discrimination complaints filed against her over 3 years. Every single one of those complaints was suppressed by her supervisor, Carlos Rivera, to protect her employment record. Last night's incident wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of years of mistreatment of passengers based on race, appearance, and perceived economic status. Employees began looking at each other with expressions of concern, recognition, and in some cases guilt. Many of them had witnessed discrimination incidents. Some had participated in them. Others had stayed silent when they should have spoken up. Effective immediately, Marcus announced Skylink Airlines is implementing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. Every employee will receive mandatory sensitivity training. Every customer complaint will be investigated by an independent board. Every passenger will be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their appearance, race, or economic status. The scope of the changes Marcus was announcing began to sink in for employees around the world. This wasn't just about policy updates or training seminars. This was about fundamentally changing how they did their jobs. 47 employees have been terminated for discrimination, theft, or suppressing customer complaints. Marcus continued. 12 supervisors have been terminated for enabling discriminatory behavior. The entire corporate training department has been terminated for teaching employees to doubt passenger complaints and judge customers based on appearance. The numbers were staggering. Entire management structures were being dismantled. Departments were being rebuilt from scratch. The company employees had known was being transformed overnight. But this transformation isn't just about terminations and policy changes, Marcus said. It's about creating a culture where every employee understands that our passengers trust us with their safety, their time, and their dignity. That trust is sacred, and anyone who violates it has no place at the Skylink Airlines. Sarah Kim was watching the broadcast from the employee break room at Miami International Airport, surrounded by flight attendants and gate agents who were processing the magnitude of what their new owner was announcing. She'd been promoted just 12 hours earlier for having the integrity to recognize discrimination when she saw it. Sarah Kim Marcus said, looking directly into the camera, demonstrated the kind of integrity we need from every Skylink employee. When she saw discrimination happening, she spoke up. When she witnessed inappropriate behavior, she didn't stay silent. Sarah has been promoted to head of our new sensitivity training program, and she'll be working with external experts to ensure every employee understands their responsibility to treat passengers with respect. Sarah felt her coworkers' eyes turn toward her. Some looked impressed. Others looked concerned that they might be held to the same standard of speaking up when they witnessed problems. David Rodriguez, a passenger who witnessed last night's incident, will be consulting with us to develop comprehensive diversity and inclusion practices. Marcus continued. Maria Gonzalez, another witness, will be helping us understand how discrimination affects passengers from different economic backgrounds. Jennifer Walsh will be advising us on how social media and real-time documentation can be used to promote accountability. The passengers who'd spoken up were being rewarded for their courage. The message to Skylink employees was clear. The company valued people who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Every passenger who filed a discrimination complaint that was suppressed by our previous management will be contacted personally and offered compensation, Marcus announced. They'll also be invited to participate in developing our new customer service standards. The people who were mistreated by our employees will help us ensure it never happens again. The financial cost of what Marcus was proposing was enormous. Personal apologies from senior executives, first-class travel compensation, involvement in policy development, complete restructuring of training programs. But employees were beginning to understand that their new owner measured success differently than previous management. To the employees who are watching this and wondering if you'll be next to be terminated, Marcus said, looking directly into the camera, let me be clear about the standards you'll be held to. Treat every passenger with dignity and respect. Take every complaint seriously. Speak up when you see discrimination. Follow company policies regarding customer service and professional behavior. He paused, letting that sink in. Those aren't difficult standards to meet. They're basic human decency. If you can't meet those standards, you don't belong at the Skylink Airlines. The video conference ended with Marcus providing contact information for reporting discrimination incidents, announcing the immediate availability of sensitivity training resources, and promising that additional changes would be implemented over the coming weeks. As employees around the world logged off the video conference and returned to their duties, they understood that everything had changed. The Skylink Airlines they'd worked for yesterday was gone. The company Marcus Thompson was building would demand higher standards, greater accountability, and complete commitment to treating passengers with dignity. The transformation had begun. Within 24 hours of Marcus Thompson's global employee address, the impact of the Skylink Airlines incident was reverberating throughout the entire aviation industry. Competing airlines were conducting emergency reviews of their own customer service policies, fearful that similar incidents might be exposed at their companies. Delta Airlines announced a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints filed in the past 5 years. United Airlines established a new passenger advocate position to ensure complaints were handled appropriately. Southwest Airlines implemented immediate retraining for all customer service employees. American Airlines created an independent oversight board for investigating discrimination allegations. The industry-wide response wasn't driven by altruism. It was driven by fear of becoming the next company to face public humiliation and corporate transformation due to discriminatory practices. The video of Rebecca Martinez slapping Marcus Thompson had been viewed over 50 million times across all social media platforms. #Skylink had generated millions of posts, comments, and shares. The incident had become a global symbol of both discrimination and corporate accountability. Business schools were already developing case studies about Marcus Thompson's response to discrimination. Harvard Business School announced a new course on crisis leadership and corporate transformation using the Skylink incident as a primary example. Stanford Graduate School of Business added the case to their diversity and inclusion curriculum. Legal experts were analyzing the federal criminal charges against Rebecca Martinez and the civil rights implications of discrimination in commercial aviation. The FBI had opened an investigation into organized discrimination practices at multiple airlines, using the Skylink case as a model for what to look for at other companies. Employment lawyers were advising airline clients to conduct immediate audits of their complaint handling procedures. The discovery that Skylink supervisors had suppressed dozens of discrimination complaints created liability exposure that other airlines wanted to avoid. Congressional representatives were calling for hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation. Senator Elizabeth Warren issued a statement demanding that the Department of Transportation investigate industry-wide practices regarding passenger complaints. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called for federal legislation requiring independent oversight of airline discrimination incidents. The stock market had initially punished Skylink Airlines after news of the incident broke. The company's stock price dropped 12% in the first day of trading. But as investors digested Marcus Thompson's comprehensive response, the stock began to recover. By the end of the week, Skylink's stock price had reached an all-time high as the market rewarded decisive leadership and proactive reform. Competitor airlines weren't as fortunate. United Airlines' stock price dropped after news reports revealed they'd had similar discrimination complaints that weren't properly investigated. American Airlines faced scrutiny after a 2019 incident involving racial profiling of passengers was highlighted by civil rights advocates. The travel industry trade publication Aviation Weekly published an editorial calling the Skylink incident a watershed moment for customer service in commercial aviation. The article noted that Marcus Thompson had proven that comprehensive reform was possible when leadership was committed to change. Customer advocacy groups were praising Marcus Thompson's response while demanding similar accountability from other airlines. The NAACP issued a statement commending Skylink's transformation and calling on other aviation companies to implement similar reforms. The Anti-Defamation League announced they would be monitoring airline industry practices more closely. International aviation authorities were taking notice as well. The European Aviation Safety Agency announced a review of discrimination policies at European airlines. The International Air Transport Association established a new working group on passenger rights and dignity in commercial aviation. The incident was being covered by international news outlets as an example of both the persistence of discrimination and the possibility of rapid corporate reform. BBC News ran a feature story on how one slap changed an industry. CNN International broadcast a documentary about discrimination in American commercial aviation. But the most significant impact was happening at the individual level among passengers and airline employees who were reassessing their own behaviors and expectations. Passengers were sharing their own stories of airline discrimination on social media, emboldened by Marcus Thompson's example of speaking up about mistreatment. The hashtag #AirlineDiscrimination was trending as people documented their experiences with racial profiling, economic bias, and harassment by airline employees. Airline employees were also speaking up, sharing their own observations about discrimination in their workplaces and calling for reform at their own companies. Flight attendants were posting anonymously about training that encouraged suspicion of certain types of passengers. Gate agents were describing pressure to profile customers based on appearance. Aviation industry conferences were adding sessions on diversity, inclusion, and customer service. The International Association of Flight Attendants announced mandatory sensitivity training for all members. The Airlines for America Trade Group established new guidelines for handling discrimination complaints. The incident had created a cultural shift that extended far beyond Skylink Airlines. Marcus Thompson had proven that discrimination could be exposed, addressed, and eliminated when leadership was committed to change. Other companies, both within and outside the aviation industry, were studying his approach as a model for corporate transformation. Universities were adding the Skylink case to their business ethics curricula. Leadership development programs were using Marcus Thompson's response as an example of principled decision-making under pressure. Corporate training companies were developing new modules on handling discrimination incidents based on lessons learned from the Skylink transformation. The broader impact was clear. One incident had exposed industry-wide problems and created momentum for comprehensive reform. Marcus Thompson's willingness to use his power to address discrimination had inspired similar efforts throughout the aviation industry. The question now was whether the changes would be sustained over time or whether the industry would return to old practices once the spotlight moved elsewhere. Marcus Thompson had proven that transformation was possible. The challenge for other airlines was proving that transformation was permanent. 3 months after Rebecca Martinez slapped Marcus Thompson on Skylink Airlines Flight 847, the transformation of the aviation industry was visible in airports around the world. But the real measure of change wasn't found in policy documents or training manuals. It was found in the daily interactions between airline employees and passengers who had learned to expect dignity and respect. Marcus Thompson stood in the first-class cabin of another Skylink flight, this time traveling from London to Tokyo. He was wearing the same type of casual clothing that had triggered Rebecca Martinez's discrimination: faded jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a simple hoodie. But the flight attendants greeting passengers that evening saw past his appearance to the human being underneath. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson," said Jessica Rodriguez, a new flight attendant who'd been hired as part of Skylink's comprehensive workforce renewal. "Your seat is ready, and please let me know if there's anything I can do to make your flight comfortable." Jessica had been recruited from a competitor airline specifically because of her reputation for treating all passengers with respect and professionalism. She was one of over 200 new employees Skylink had hired to replace the staff terminated for discrimination and theft. Marcus smiled and thanked her, settling into seat 1A with a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with luxury accommodations. The satisfaction came from knowing that other passengers who looked like him, who dressed casually, who didn't fit stereotypes of wealth and status, would be treated with the same respect he was receiving. In the economy cabin, Maria Santos was flying to visit her daughter in graduate school. Maria worked 2 jobs to afford the trip, and she'd saved for 8 months to buy her ticket. She was wearing her best dress, but it was clearly not designer clothing. Her shoes were comfortable, but worn. Her carry-on bag was functional, but not expensive. When Maria had trouble lifting her bag into the overhead compartment, flight attendant Robert Kim immediately offered assistance with a genuine smile. "Let me help you with that," he said, securing the bag carefully and checking to make sure it was properly positioned. 6 months earlier, Robert might have made assumptions about Maria based on her appearance. The old Skylink training had taught employees to be suspicious of passengers who didn't look wealthy, to question their ticket legitimacy, to provide minimal service to customers who didn't appear to be premium travelers. The new Skylink training taught employees that every passenger deserved respect regardless of their appearance, that customer service excellence meant treating everyone with dignity, and that assumptions based on appearance were both wrong and illegal. The transformation wasn't limited to Skylink Airlines. At airports around the world, other airlines were implementing similar changes driven by competitive pressure and regulatory scrutiny that had followed the viral video of discrimination. At Chicago O'Hare Airport, Delta Airlines gate agent Sandra Williams was welcoming passengers for a flight to Atlanta. When a young black man in a hoodie and sweatpants approached her counter with a first-class boarding pass, Sandra's first instinct was to verify the ticket carefully, but instead of acting on suspicion, Sandra caught herself and remembered the sensitivity training Delta had implemented after the Skylink incident. She looked at the passenger as a human being who deserved respect, not as a problem to be solved or a fraud to be detected. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson," Sandra said, scanning the boarding pass and welcoming him with a professional smile. "Thank you for flying with Delta tonight. Your seat is ready whenever you'd like to board." The interaction was routine, unremarkable, and exactly what it should have been. A passenger presenting a valid ticket was welcomed courteously and efficiently. No additional questions. No suspicious looks. No assumptions based on appearance. But for Marcus Johnson, the 23-year-old software engineer whose company had paid for his first-class ticket to a client meeting, the interaction represented something profound, the assumption that he belonged exactly where he was. Marcus Thompson had created ripple effects that extended far beyond his own experiences. The video of his mistreatment had exposed discrimination that affected thousands of passengers annually. His response had transformed not just Skylink Airlines but the entire industry's approach to customer service. The emotional resolution wasn't found in revenge against Rebecca Martinez, who was serving an 18-month federal sentence for assault and theft. It wasn't found in the millions of dollars Skylink had paid to compensate mistreated passengers. It wasn't found in the industry awards Marcus Thompson had received for corporate leadership. The emotional resolution was found in the daily dignity now afforded to passengers who previously might have been questioned, profiled, or harassed based on their appearance. It was found in the confidence of travelers who knew they would be treated with respect regardless of how they dressed or what they looked like. Jennifer Walsh, the socialite who had live-streamed the original incident, was now traveling regularly as part of her work with Skylink's Passenger Advocacy Board. She used her social media platform to highlight positive changes in airline customer service, documenting respectful interactions and celebrating employees who exemplified the new standards. David Rodriguez had expanded his diversity consulting business to work with multiple airlines, helping them implement comprehensive anti-discrimination programs. His own experience witnessing and documenting discrimination had given him credibility and passion for creating change in corporate cultures. Sarah Kim had become the most respected sensitivity trainer in the aviation industry, teaching employees at airlines around the world how to provide excellent customer service to all passengers, regardless of their background or appearance. The transformation was real, measurable, and sustainable. Customer satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in passenger experiences across multiple airlines. Discrimination complaints had declined significantly industry-wide. Employee training programs focused on dignity and respect had become standard practice. Marcus Thompson had proven that one person with the power and courage to demand change could transform an entire industry. But more importantly, he had created a world where countless other people would be treated with the dignity and respect every human being deserves. The true measure of success wasn't the policies that had been changed or the employees who had been terminated. It was the young passengers, the casual travelers, the people who didn't fit stereotypes of privilege who could now fly without fear of discrimination. That was justice. That was transformation. That was a legacy of standing up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Rebecca Martinez's federal conviction for assault and organized theft led to an 18-month prison sentence and permanent disqualification from employment in the aviation industry. Her criminal record followed her into every job interview, every rental application, and every background check for the rest of her life. The viral video of her actions became a permanent reminder that choices have consequences, and that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's legally required. Her story became a cautionary tale used in employee training programs across the service industry. Skylink Airlines became the gold standard for customer service excellence in commercial aviation, with customer satisfaction ratings reaching historic highs and discrimination complaints dropping to nearly zero industry-wide. The company's stock price tripled as investors recognized that treating customers with dignity was not just ethical, it was profitable. Marcus Thompson's comprehensive reforms inspired similar transformations at airlines worldwide, creating a cultural shift that made discrimination socially unacceptable and economically devastating for companies that failed to change. The legacy of Flight 847 extends beyond corporate policies and training programs to the millions of passengers who now travel with dignity and respect. If you've ever been judged by your appearance or treated like you don't belong, remember Marcus Thompson's example: stay calm. Document everything and use whatever power you have to create change. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly, but when it comes with patience and strategy behind it, it comes completely. Share your own stories of standing up for dignity because the next person who needs courage might find it in your example. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how we treat each other and what real justice looks like, then do something about it. Hit that like button to show support for standing up against discrimination. Subscribe to this channel because we need more stories about people who use their power to make positive change in the world. And most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Share it with someone who has faced discrimination and needs to know that their dignity matters. Share it with someone who has the power to make change but hasn't found the courage yet. Share it because every person who watches this story becomes part of the solution. Together, we can create a world where everyone travels with respect, where everyone is treated with dignity, and where standing up for what's right always wins in the end. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice matters. Your actions count, and change starts with each one of us.